spectacular Gold Coast of Australia. It's home to many things, to surfing, to beach life, recreation, retirement. It's home to Alan Jones, Australia's most recent Formula One world champion. And it's home also to its greatest, a 3-time world champion who in 1966 did something which probably will never be repeated in the sport. To win the world championship at the wheel of a car designed and built by himself and carrying his own name, the great name of Brabham. So Jack, it's wonderful to see you, and thanks for sparing the time to talk. First things first, all your many friends and fans back in the UK will be keen to know how you're doing. You've had a few health issues and so on, but you're looking great, and I think the news in the last couple of weeks, you've just been voted, was it a national treasure of Australia? Or?
National treasure, yeah. That's quite an honour, really, and I was quite pleased with that. I thought that was a good thing.
Absolutely, thoroughly deserved. And we'll try to examine exactly why you've been awarded that as we relive some of the great achievements of yours through the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
Take us back to the very beginning. 18, 19 years old. What sort of chap were you? And were you an engineer? Were you a racer? Or what did you think you were going to become?
Well, I hadn't even seen any motor racing at that stage. And I had engineering side. And I was buying and selling motorbikes to start with. That's how I earned my first lot of money.
What gave you the opening to become a driver rather than an engineer?
I had a friend, Johnny Schonberg, who was the driver and I was the mechanic. But unfortunately his wife stopped him from driving because he had a couple of accidents. And I decided I'd have a go myself, and the rest is history. Well, the first race was a race where I had to cope with the dirt being thrown in my face because I was on the dirt track. And of course the wheels of the cars in front used to throw up the dirt. And that was the worst part, really. But after I'd had 3 nights, I finished up in front. But it was a grounding that you need. Everybody needs a grounding in motorsport. And I was lucky to have that.
But your driving style behind the wheel, you were very upright, very sort of forward. Sterling was...
Well, that was from the midget. The midget used to have the steering wheel well back and a lot of purchase on the wheel. But my style had to change, of course, to keep up with the rest. And but the early days on the midgets, of course, sharpened up my reactions. And I think it really helped for driving in the rain and that sort of thing. It really tweaks up your reactions.
Having owned a Cooper Bristol in Australia, when Jack came to England, he went straight to John Cooper looking for work. He found a company full of ambition and innovation, but it was the invention of the rear-engined racing car that really put Cooper on the map.
Why was it so obvious to Cooper and maybe yourself that rear engine was the direction to go? Why did it not occur to anyone else? Because you were the real pioneers.
Well, I don't know really, but I liked the idea myself, and I certainly helped a lot with the development of it. The fact that everybody's got a rear engine car now, it must have been the right idea.
Seems obvious now, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, our big problem in those days, of course, when we first started, there was no gearboxes for rear-engine cars. So we had to make our own.
So late 50s, you were sort of learning the craft of being a race driver. You were back and forth to Australia.
Yeah.
And what about the drivers that you were competing against in that era? I mean, the great names of motorsport, but who stands out in your mind as the most competitive and the guys that you like to race against?
Well, Phil Hill, of course, was a very competitive driver. Sterling was probably the best driver I've ever driven with, really, from a competitive point of view. And I learned a lot from him. And I'd been to a BRDC meeting up in London, and after that I had to get to Crystal Palace to pick up some bodywork. And anyway, I went across Westminster Bridge and going round the roundabout and everything, and next thing there was a policeman chasing me on a motorbike with sparks coming off his footrest. So I pulled in the side and the policeman pulled up, parked his bike in front of the car so I couldn't move, and strolled back to the window and he says, "Who do you think you are, Sterling Moss?" I said, "No, but I love beating him." God, he said, "That's really made my day. What's your hurry? Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I've got to get to Crystal Palace. I'm not sure of the way." So he said, "Follow me." And I couldn't keep up with him.
Sunny Monaco and the Grand Prix, the first event in this year's world title contest.
That 59 season brought Jack only 2 wins in Monaco and Britain.
Chased home by Tony Brooks in a Ferrari, Jack Brabham, Cooper, took the event at an average of 66.7, one up to the Australian ace.
But having secured podiums in Holland and France, he was in contention for the title when he had a serious accident in Portugal.
Yeah, that's the only accident I've had driving, so it's not a bad record, really. But unfortunately, I got tangled with a Portuguese driver, and he knocked me off the track, and I hit a telegraph post and knocked the telegraph post right over. Now, there were 2 things saved me. One was the telegraph post. That stopped me going down in amongst the trees, and I ricocheted off the post back to the track. And the second thing that saved me was I didn't have a seatbelt. And when the car was upside down coming back, I fell out. And the car hit the track and destroyed itself.
My goodness.
So luckily I wasn't in it.
Jack may have survived, but others weren't so fortunate. This was a very dangerous and difficult period in Grand Prix racing, and many of Sir Jack's friends and colleagues were lost in this era. Having recovered from his injuries, Jack arrived in Sebring in Florida, still in with a chance of the world title.
Brabham is favoured here in the December sun, but he's been up all night working on his car, and the 40 laps of this 5-mile circuit might prove too much for his number 8 Cooper Climax.
I led the race all the way up till the last lap.
It's Brabham all the way now. The race and the World Championship are his, with just 1 lap to go. And team manager John Cooper welcomes his winner home. But there's something wrong. It's McLaren, number 9, who takes the checkered flag. There's consternation in the Cooper pit. Brabham should have come through first.
Unfortunately, I ran out of petrol. And what had happened was John Cooper refueled the cars, and he put 1 churn less in my car than he did in Bruce's. And my car ran out on the last lap. And I coasted to within probably 100 yards of the finish line. So I jumped out and pushed the car the rest of the way. And the mechanics and everybody kept people away, so I had to do it myself. And eventually got the car over the line with enough points to win the championship.
And Jack Brabham pushes his way to the Motor Racing Championship of the world.
But did you think that the championship was lost at that moment? Did you have any idea what was happening?
No, not till I finished the race, because I didn't know what happened with the rest of the people. But I finished with enough points to win the championship, which was great. Running out of fuel seems to be part of my career. In 1970, I had another experience. I was running out of fuel because the fuel injection had been unfortunately put on full rich.
Oh, right.
And I used 4 gallons of fuel more than I should have.
Yeah.
So I lost that one as well.
So you were the top man at pushing the car home anyway.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm very good at it.
You entered the 1960 season as defending world champion. What was the relationship like with Cooper? Because you were starting to do a lot more of the car setup and the engineering yourself as opposed to Cooper.
Coopers, to me, didn't seem as if they really wanted to go forward. They were quite complacent, really, to keep winning in the way they do. But I was of the opinion now we had to move forward, and I knew that Ron Tornak was an extremely good car designer. So I got him over from Australia, and we formed a company and started our own car building.
In the late 50s and early 60s, Jack also competed at the Indianapolis 500. The rear-engine cars were quite a shock for the old racers and their big, powerful roadsters.
I didn't win, but I certainly made an impression while I was there. And I showed the boys over there that the rear-engine car was the way to go because I only had half the power of them.
Yeah.
And I was up there with them.
Yeah. And the era of the big old roadsters, that was
gone.
gone.
Yeah, the big old roadsters were gone.
So how much of that 1960 car was really a kind of early Brabham as opposed to a Cooper?
Well, quite a bit really was Brabham because, as I say, we had to make the gearboxes and a lot of work that we had to do that Coopers weren't really doing. And we got at the stage where it was race winner again.
What were the highlights from 1960 that stand out in your mind, the racing highlights?
Winning at Reims, I think, the French Grand Prix in 1960 was a fantastic race. The race was probably the most competitive race I'd driven in. And to win that race was very, very satisfying.
And 1960, compared to 59, it was a far more dominant season.
Yeah.
It didn't have that sort of nail-biting climax to
No.
it. But in many ways, it must have been a lot more satisfying to win the title that way.
It was a lot more satisfying, and racing against the Ferraris and beating them was fantastic.
After the break, Jack talks about life as a team owner and the feeling of becoming a world champion in a car carrying his own name. In 1961, Sir Jack Brabham left the Cooper Car Company to set up his own team in partnership with his friend and colleague Ron Toranak. But despite already being a 2-time world champion, he couldn't trade on his own name just yet.
We started an organisation called Motor Racing Developments, so we used the initials MRD until such times as we were pointed out that that wasn't the name to have for France. So,
oh, I see, yes.
so we decided to change the name, and we changed it to Brabham.
Yeah, and that started to mean something different in France quite soon after that. But they were difficult times because the regulations had changed. You were back down to the sort of 1.5 litre formula, and it was tough for you to be competitive, wasn't it?
Well, we won the championship twice with a 2.5 litre. And when it come 1.5 litre, of course, we were right on the back foot because Coventry Climax didn't have an engine that was competitive with the Ferrari. So Ferrari started winning the races then instead of us. And that happened for a few years till such times as they changed the formula again to 3 litre, and then we were back in business.
Yeah. But in the meantime, you were producing cars and selling cars very successfully. Were you sort of evolving into Jack Brabham, the businessman, rather than the racer at this point?
We were always trying to do better with our cars, of course. So the engineering side was always there, even if we weren't winning. They were always striving to win. And the engineering side was always a very good interest as far as I was concerned. And I had just as much pleasure out of that as I had out of driving.
The early 60s were a struggle for the newly formed Brabham team. Between 62 and 65, Sir Jack never achieved higher than 7th in the Drivers' Championship. But thanks to the new Repco engines, 1966 proved to be very different.
What was the moment of sort of inspiration that took you to Repco for your engines?
I had the idea, and I was going to do it anyway with aluminium block and build an engine around it. But I went to Repco and asked them if they could help me. And they agreed to, and they built the engine, done a very good job of it, and we started winning races again.
It's the French Grand Prix, and it's the first Grand Prix victory for Australian Jack Brabham for 6 years. It's also the first time that a driver has ever won a world title event in a car of his own construction.
That was very, very satisfying. And well, we had an Australian team, you know, we had Ron Tornak, and we had Australian and New Zealand mechanics. It was really a great effort. And to win for Australia, if you like, was a great honour.
And then the wins just started repeating themselves,
yeah.
and you were on a sort of roll. You beat John Surtees in the German Grand Prix, and that was all satisfying.
That was an exciting race, and it was in the wet as well.
The German Grand Prix, 14 miles of ups and downs over the grueling Nürburgring.
To win a Grand Prix on the Nürburgring in the wet was quite an achievement.
In frightful weather conditions, Brabham wins his 4th title race in a row at an average of over 86.
So Brabham wins the World Championship, a Brabham car, Jack Brabham behind the wheel, the first, and you have to feel probably only time that that's going to happen. A driver wins a World Championship in a car bearing his name. What was the feeling at the end of that 1966 campaign?
Great satisfaction. It was definitely the pinnacle of my career, really.
And the honours started coming. I think there was an OBE at the end of that season.
Yeah, actually I had to be at the palace and drive through the palace gates at 2 minutes to 11. Not 3 minutes, 2 minutes to 11. And when I came back, I couldn't start the car. The starter motor had jammed. And I was there in top hat and tails and all the rest of it, and I finished up underneath the bonnet working on the car. Managed to his last car out. I had a big policeman standing there saying, "Are you going to be very long?"
1967, of course, it was another World Championship for Brabham, and Denny Hulme takes the title this time.
Yeah.
From a mechanic's point of view, from an engineer's point of view, from a team owner's point of view, that must have been as satisfying as what had happened in
Absolutely.
66. Yeah.
The team won, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And so the team won 2 years in a row.
Yeah. What was Denny Hulme like as a
well,
team member?
He was a good driver and a good teammate, really. I should have won that year, really. But the mechanics put a cast-iron cam follower in my engine by mistake, and it broke in the American Grand Prix, and I didn't get any points.
Right.
So I lost it, really, to mechanical problems.
Yeah. But Brabham still ruled the world. And
yeah, well, the Brabham still won anyway.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, you had come through the most dangerous era that the sport had ever seen. As you said, you'd only ever had one serious crash. You were starting to think, I'm sure, at this point about retirement?
Well, I was getting pressure to retirement, from my wife and family, and I actually decided I was going to retire. In 1970, we started off by winning the South African Grand Prix, and looked like being a fantastic year. And unfortunately, I had a couple of things go wrong during the year. I had a bit of an incident myself in the Monaco Grand Prix, and
I mean, you say a bit of an incident, but I mean, I'm sure it's something that sort of stuck in your mind for quite a few years. You were under pressure from Jochen Rindt,
well,
I think.
actually, what happened was that I just couldn't quite get stopped for the last corner, and just nudged the fence. But a flag marshal jumped over the fence to push the car back. And when he pushed it, he lost his balance and fell across the nose of the car with his hands over either side. And I said, what do you do? I couldn't very well drive over. I'd have killed him if I'd started off again.
And this was the last corner?
In the last corner, yeah. Of course, while he was getting himself off, Rindt went by. So that was another race down.
But at this point, I mean, the next generation was starting to come through. Jochen Rindt was a driver that you tried to sign a couple of times, and you followed his career quite closely, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I had him drive for me one year as well.
Yeah.
I thought a lot of Rindt. He was an excellent driver, really, and a good driver that you could drive wheel to wheel with without any trouble.
So Jack did finally call it a day at the end of the 1970 season, at the ripe old age of 44. but not without one last parting shot for certain members of the press.
That was the Dutch Grand Prix. We went up the road and found a false beard, long beard that I was able to put on, and I used the jack handle for a stick, and the reason I did that was because the press had been saying the old man of racing, and I didn't think that was, that was right. So I decided I'd have a shot at him with the beard.
But you did call it a day, and you came back here to Australia. And what sort of impression have you formed of what's happened to Formula One since your era, the great sort of commercial monster that it's become?
Well, the engineering side of the cars, of course, has accelerated, and cars are just so much safer and stronger than what we used to use. And it just keeps going on. The engineering and development side never stops. And I'm just as interested in that side as I am in the drivers.
You'd have been following the career of Mark Webber very closely, and he's got so close, but not quite close enough.
Yeah, very close, actually. I thought he was going to win it, really. But unfortunately, he lost it in career in the wet, and cost him the championship. It would have been great to have had a third world champion for Australia at that time.
And talking of good drivers, the Brabham dynasty continues. First of all, your three sons have all made an impression in motorsport at the highest level. That must give you great pride, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And to have three sons come along and all do as well in motor racing at the time, it was very satisfying. Jeffrey won a lot of races and won the IMSA Championship 4 times and in America, and raced at Indy, I think something like 10 times. And David, of course, has finished up winning Le Mans 24-hour race. Yeah. And he's won a lot of races, actually, and won a lot of championships. So very satisfying to see those boys doing so well.
And then the next generation as well, with young Matthew out there racing, your grandson.
Yeah, but now we've got a third generation just to make sure that the Brabham name doesn't disappear.
In so many ways, you changed the sport forever, and the name of Brabham will be part of Formula One and Grand Prix motor racing history forever. It's been a privilege to meet you, sir, and relive some of the great memories. And thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Steve.